This is Boom and Bust in Modern America, Objective 2, Part 2, about how the consumer culture of the 1950s contributed to that particular economic boom. And one thing we have to address here, one phrase I want you to be aware of, keeping up with the Joneses. Keeping up with the Joneses was a phrase that people used to say, if your neighbor has something, you've got to have it too. And what we're going to find out here is the ripple effect in the microeconomic spending cycle increases again. As demand for all sorts of things goes up, you have to supply those things. And that means hiring more people and putting more money in their pockets to also spend. Now, like the 1920s, installment plans or buying on credit became very popular. The first credit card came into existence in 1950. It was the Diners Club card. And pretty soon you started to see credit cards popping up all over the place in the 1950s. Now, once again, initially, consumers were slow to spend because of memories of the Great Depression. Don't spend all your money or you'll end up there again. But sooner or later, advertising got really good at promoting to people that you should get this, you should have this, and it led to massive amounts of debt again. In the 1950s, 80% of all goods were being bought on credit, and consumer debt, as you can see here on the side, in billions of dollars, went from just under $10 billion in 1946 to almost $60 billion by 1960. People were buying lots of stuff with their brand new credit cards. Advertising on Madison Avenue played a prominent role in that. Once again, the mantra was, whatever it takes, again. Sometimes a beautiful woman that might enjoy a Schlitz beer. Or showing parents how television actually could help kids with their homework or make them smarter. Getting famous athletes like the baseball player Willie Mays to sell cigarettes. And if a famous athlete couldn't get it done, then maybe an actor could, like Ronald Reagan. Maybe use him to sell cigarettes. Reagan would eventually become the governor of California. Then maybe and if that didn't work, maybe you could get doctors to sell cigarettes. Yes, cigarette smoking was pretty popular in the 1950s, and it was frankly more common than uncommon to see a doctor advertising the benefits of cigarette smoking. But of course, the bottom line behind the whatever it takes mantra of the 1950s was you needed these things, you had to have these things. They could make you happier. They could make your life better. Now, in some cases, once again, that could be persuasion in all sorts of ways. Convincing women that they needed a different kind of brassiere. This is not the Maidenform ad, but the Maidenform ads told women that they could live like a queen and live their utmost dreams if they just bought a new kind of bra. Sometimes it was playing to men's need to attract women. It's He-Man aroma wows the ladies, according to, once again, Ronald Reagan here. If you smoke, you become more attractive to women, so says the ad of the 1950s. Or sometimes it's just the idea that after growing up in the Depression and fighting in World War II, you deserve a break today. That became one of the big mantras of the McDonald's food chain, and that became a big psychological selling point in the 1950s. Learn to relax. Buy things that will help you relax. Sometimes it was as simple as seduction. Finding very attractive women to sell your product. Sometimes it was based in humor, just like it had been in the 1920s, but in a different way. Sometimes, again, it was based on sexual innuendo. Get Barbasol and see what happens. Sometimes, again, it was based on sentimentality. You could gather with friends, or you could go to the beach and capture all these memories with a Kodak camera. Or have a beer on the back porch or in the kitchen with friends of yours. Enjoy the good life for a while. Or remember when you were a kid and hamburgers were only 15 cents? You can have that feeling again. Go back to the McDonald's, go back to the drive-in. Play on that sentimentality. And in some cases, even a little bit of brainwashing. Get Lucky Strike cigarettes. Be happy all the time. Again, you can see other things here. A cheerleader who's happy because she has the Lucky Strikes. High schoolers being encouraged to smoke now. A guy up in the upper right-hand corner that just got his PhD to prove how much he knows. He's going to give you an equation and say that he's happy with his Lucky Strikes. The bottom line here is that Madison Avenue once again becomes the center of the rebuilt fastest growing business in America, marketing, also known as advertising, again. And with TV as the advertising tool, this turns into the golden age of American advertising. Now, of course, you see fictional characters on television like Mad Men and Don Draper, and that might seem like it fictionalizes things a bit. But in truth, the advertising executive of Madison Avenue back at that time really wasn't too different than Don Draper and Mad Men. As a matter of fact, documentaries have been written about the real Mad Men, the renegades of Madison Avenue, and the golden age of American advertising. And it was not uncommon to use the television as an advertising tool, even in some cases for political candidates. Dwight Eisenhower had made famous use of television ads in his presidential campaigns in the 1950s, and here in 1960, John F. Kennedy on the left and Richard Nixon on the right engaged in the first televised presidential debate. In 1946, there had only been 6 TV companies in America. 10 years later, in 1956, there were 442. And like it had been before, in Europe, TV was still owned by the government. Only public broadcasting was allowed, just like the radio in the 1920s. But in America, privately owned TV stations made the TV, like the radio had been in the 1920s. The TV now was the selling machine, and soap operas became popular again. So the ultimate question is, why didn't the Great Depression happen again? Well, there's 2 reasons for that. The first prominent one, is that government regulations had taken place in the 1930s, like the Securities and Exchange Commission, or the SEC. They were basically in place to make sure people didn't get too reckless with their loans. Also was the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. At that time, they were telling people that if you put your money in a bank and the bank loaned it out recklessly, the government would step in and reimburse your account up to $100,000. Today, as far as I know, it's up to about $200,000 or $250,000. The bottom line was that they had learned the lesson. Despite all of the buying and all of the debt, which had actually been more than it had been in the 1920s, to get the good life of the 1950s, banks and borrowers became much more conservative and much more responsible. Okay, that's it. Thanks for listening.